change. 40% of the Pentagon's budget for overseas operations is spent on paying for the fuel to take the fuel to the place where it will be needed.
Yeah.
Paying for the fuel to take the plane, so that the planes can shoot down other people or whatever. Paying for the fuel to transport, paying the transportation costs of the fuel that you're going to need when you're there. Now, 40% of the Pentagon's budget for something like the Afghanistan war is for the fuel so that they can emit it into the atmosphere. And that's not sustainable. And the Kyoto Accord did not even allow them to include in the budget of how much each country is going to reduce its emissions. You didn't talk about the military. They pretended that didn't count. It counts. It's still in the air. It goes up there. We breathe it. It eats us. We have to count it. So even if we think we have to fight wars, we have to stop emitting the stuff because it's a large part. Now, Paul Hawkins' book, Drawdown, made a list of the 100 things that could be done to reduce global warming. And he rank ordered them. He figured out how much they would actually succeed, how effective they would be, and how much they would cost. And he rank ordered them in terms of effectiveness. And then somebody said, well, is there anything you left out because you couldn't figure it out? He said, yeah, war. He said, we know it's way up there. It's a very important factor in global warming, but we don't have the numbers because the Pentagon and these countries do not release all this information. So we can't calculate it. But we know we have to reduce it. So it's not even on there. The thing is that to be visionary, we have to say, yeah, we have to count that because it's real. And it's included in the thing, therefore we have to reduce military because that's a good place to kill two birds with one stone. You reduce your military, you reduce the probability of war. You also reduce global warming. So that has to be in there. And it may not be realistic, Doug, but it's got to be in there. That's my opinion. We need that one. Huh?
I didn't say it wasn't realistic.
Okay, you said it wasn't going to happen soon. Well, okay, but this is what I'm trying to illustrate is that we have a question whether we want to stick to very realistic checklist of the kind that Doug was talking last night. Do this year, do this next year, etc. Very specific checklist. Or whether we're talking about producing an agenda for something for us to look forward to that may be really hard to do. And a lot of those on their list so far are going to be really hard to do. And, in any one session, I suspect you're going to have two different groups of people arguing, well, this isn't as realistic. If we cut this back, it'll be better. If we just make it more realistic, something we can achieve. Yeah. Doug.
Yeah, well, I think you're joining the issue here, Metta. I applaud everything you said, but I think you're now getting us to focus on what we really need to do and compiling a list of things to do to save the planet. There's an A list and a B list. A, what needs to be done now, and B, what ought to be done as the years go by to get us into a vision. So that I think if we can, in many ways I see it, a little bit of differentiation between, you say, like, I think you gave it away in the title, How to Save the World in a Hurry. There are urgent questions that need to be done. By urgent, I would say the next 5, 7 years in that time period. And then there's what ought to be done over the next 25, 30, 40, 50-year period in order to have the natural progression of the development of the world take place without it being blown up in the meantime. So I kind of see an A and a B list.
I second the motion. I think 2 lists.
Okay, Robin and then Michael. We weren't going to have this conversation, but let's have this much of the conversation and then talk about how much more of it we want. Robin.
Yeah, and I think this conversation will actually enhance
it'll reduce the time on the rest of it.
I can't hear you.
I think having this conversation now will reduce our time on some of the others because it'll clarify. I agree with what Doug was saying on the sort of A and B. I think we're looking for policy proposals, which are really A items for the list of 25. There are aspirational, longer term, broader context goals that wouldn't necessarily be policies. So in the short term, in a hurry, 5 to 7 years, 5 to 10 years, whatever, it seems to be policies, specific policies. But you've given us a very convenient option, which is the footnote. So within the footnote, even of the 25, we can clearly illustrate the B list, the context for our A proposal.
Thank you. All right. I think that is true. And you could also put asterisks if you want. Which ones we think are short-term goals and which are longer goals if you want. We could separate into two lists, but I think it's maybe easier to put an asterisk for the short-term goals. Maybe. I don't know. Let's think about that. Michael, you want to say something?
I'll skip it for a moment.
Okay.
I just agree with the two lists.
The two lists. All right. Is that reasonable? Okay, then let's consider whether we want to do it with the asterisks or not. And some of them may not be clear whether they're short-term or long-term goals. Yes, Joy.
Well, and perhaps how you order them on the page, having short-term first and longer-term after. I mean, with an asterisk.
Mm-hmm.
Just, ordering kind of helps.
Could be. All right. But, yes, I've forgotten your name. Yes.
Just for your information, not in terms of methodology, but I just want to bring into play here the fact that the Leaf Manifesto has
I can't hear you.
the Leaf Manifesto in Canada,
Yes.
which deals with sustainability, especially in terms of energy resources,
Right.
and suggests cutbacks in the military as well, although it doesn't deal with nuclear or weapons and cyber security. So I just want to bring you.
Yes, that's true. Yes, and by the way, if for example, if you said, well, we can't get an 80% cut back within any foreseeable, you might want to change it to 20% cut back. I mean, these proposals, frankly, the first list of proposals I made up in about 20 minutes. It was just the top of the head to illustrate how a proposal might look. That's all it was meant to be. And then when it came to add, we just left it in there and added others. So I'm not claiming that the ones I invented are sacred or any, there are no sacred ones on there. Yes, Doug.
I want to speak to the asterisk question.
Yes.
I think we have to consider the audience, the readership of who we're aiming this at. And included would be the media, certainly, and civil society leaders, and a cross range of important organizations, as well as the public writ large. And I hope that, as a preamble, I hope that the distribution of our product today will receive wide attention. It's worthy of it. Okay. Now, people reading a list of recommendations or what we propose out of here, and if they read it and see some things with an asterisk and then other things without, I believe that it dilutes the ability to comprehend and interpret what we are stating here among ourselves is urgent. In other words, we should be explicit about what we consider urgent. There are urgent things that need to be done. And certainly, as an example, nuclear weapons would be the de-alerting of nuclear weapons in order to take them off high alert status. That's different from, considerably different from a long-range goal of the abolition of nuclear weapons. Period. So I think to enhance our credibility, ease of reading, and impact, our product should be clearly delineated as what we consider urgent and what we consider needs to be done over the next 40, 50-year period.
Yes, Harry.
I think that's the proposal should count in two things. One is the degree of impact.
The real impact,
Degree of impact.
Degree of
the degree of impact.
Give an impact in climate change, whatever, and also the time frame. Say 5 years, what impact you're going to achieve? That would be come to the top, you know, list.
Well, I think this is going to be a really complicated business. Yeah, Paul. Hurry.
Well, I mean, one way of looking at the long and short term is that the long term represent the overall goals, like the state of affairs that we want to bring about, and then the short term goals are the means that we're going to use to follow that, to achieve that. So the long term becomes a kind of preamble that's with a view to accomplishing the following. We propose to follow these specific
One
short-term-
page, 25 lines, and a little header. And you cannot get more than, you can't get anything more on there. That's
Well,
the
we'd be
rule.
scooping some of the things off the bottom of the page and putting them up at the top.
Well, I don't know about this. I think we're really getting into details that maybe we need to look at after we come in with these things. Because I think if we try to specify in advance, I'm not sure that we can make rules for ourselves to live with that we'll like the looks of when we get to these breakout groups. I think personally, I think what we need to do is simply pick the ones that we want. The war and weapons gets to pick 6. Global warming gets to pick 6. Enabling measures gets to pick 5. And all of the others get to pick 2. And there are 2 groups that we know have very small representation, if any, in this room right now. One is famine, although Joan is here for famine, and I hope Mustafa shows up. We'll have famine covered. And the other is pandemics. And Ron St. John, I don't know whether there's a partner for you at all, even in this room. Is there anybody here who is here to talk about pandemics?
Vinay will be.
Vinay will be, yes, but all right. So we will have that. So we'll have these breakout groups. Each of you pick these things, and then and when we get back together, we have to reconcile the whole thing. And that may be the time when we decide we want to put them into 2 separate groups, or put asterisks, or what we want to do. Yes, John.
One thing that I think maybe climate change group should be able to have more things on the list than other groups. One of the odd things, and I did have opportunity for input, so it's partly self-critical, that the approach that we're having is rather human-centric. Almost everything of the way it's divided up are things that hurt people. Like there's very few things, you know, the other species on the planet, and a lot of ways that climate change is a substitute for that, because a lot of the remedies, you know, are based on, you know, things like.
What I'm not getting your point.
Animals.
Animals, yes, well,
I was saying that we should maybe be able to have more than the other.
Well, you do, you have 6.
Well, maybe we should have more than 6.
Well, I'm sorry, but the organizing committee allocated 6 to the global warming and 6 to the war and weapons and 5 to the enabling measures. And if we want to have that reviewed now, we will be in deep trouble for the whole day. I recommend that we don't go there. Now, let's get down to business, because I've already used up half an hour of the time. The enabling measures, people we're going to use to begin to do the work of picking out the measures that need to be adopted for this group. Okay. I don't think we resolved it. By any means, but I think we're going to have to defer it for the moment.
it's sort of to be continued, yeah?
We need Michael. Do you have your name tag somewhere to put them on? Yeah. We don't have enough to give you another name tag.
Well, my name is Philip Rawkins. I should have been here chairing a session yesterday, but I had to leave because of the boom of the PA system, which challenged my ears, I'm afraid. But here we are now. And this is the follow through on the session on enabling measures yesterday afternoon. But the focus now is not on presenting new information on particular themes, but it is on looking at the items on the platform which concern enabling measures, and we're going to focus on some of these which we would like to nominate for your attention, but it will be up to you which ones are selected. In thinking about the approach that we take, and when I say, sorry, is that better? It's better. In thinking about the approach that we take, and when I say we, Joy Kennedy, Paul Antze, and our colleague from New York State, Marien, who's disappeared right now. We're looking,
We do need it louder somehow.
We need it.
Speak right into the mic.
Maybe you can turn it up.
No, it's not too much louder.
Yeah,
That's all we need.
happy medium.
Put your microphone volume up. Okay, turn podium up, but slow it down.
okay, is that better? That's probably too loud. When we think about enabling measures, we recognize that there are many things on the platform which could be enabling measures, which are actually under other categories. We're not trying to be imperialist and claim these for enabling measures, but our own approach has been to emphasize those which have the broadest implications, those which have implications for a range of different challenges on the platform. Our approach is also, in terms of picking up on the previous conversation and the remarks of Chairman Spencer, we are focusing on the short and medium term. That is, we're looking at items where things can be realizable in the short term or the medium term. In other areas, that choice may not be so clear. But as Chairman Mao said many years ago, on a journey of 1,000 li, the first step is the most important. And the point that we're making is that if you want to get to the major goals, you have to start somewhere. And you build momentum by taking one step at a time. So we're looking at items which are focused and concrete, have broad implications, and which are realizable, which are feasible. There was also a lot of discussion in the sessions yesterday about context and the importance of context. And I think what we're emphasizing is that all of the areas of change are multidimensional. There's no A plus B equals C. All of the context for every one of the kinds of changes that we're looking at and we've discussed yesterday involve multiple actors and multiple arenas in order to get change. And therefore you have to try to take that breadth of the environment into account in moving forward. At times it's challenging, and it can be, it can tend to disable action rather than enable it, but there are ways through, and we hope today to also discuss some of the positive ways in which you can confront those factors. So having said all of that, our first speaker will be Marien, who has some broad observations to make. We haven't had as much opportunity to engage with Michael as we might have liked, so we'll have to see what Michael has to say, but he certainly has an important perspective to bring to bear on the items in enabling measures and their relationship to some of the other items in the platform. So now I'll give the floor to Marien.
You have to use the mic.
Okay.
Thank you. Is it okay to sit or?
No, you have to use the
use this
mic.
mic.
Sorry.
Okay, largely from yesterday's session, I came up with 7 ideas which are hopefully interrelated, 7 observations, and be in a hurry, so I hope I can get through in 10 minutes or so. The first one is a historical footnote to David Harry's talk about the current situation in which we have an era of wicked problems, and there's a very rapid change. And I want to go back to the early 70s. Has anyone ever heard of the Canadian Association for Future Studies, or CAFS?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. It started around 1970 and it died around 1985. I knew most of the presidents, but they had a wonderful meeting in Kingston in 1977 and in 1979, a meeting in Ottawa in 78, and then combining with the Americans World Future Society, they had a huge meeting right here in Toronto in 2 hotels in 1980, which was attended by 5,500 people, and they had 1,150 presentations, and that was the zenith of futures thinking, and everything slowly went downhill from there. And World Future Society is near the bottom or sub-bottom right now. So what has happened today or yesterday is just an awesome group of presentations. And David and I put our heads together, and we both agreed that there's nothing like this in any of the World Future Society meetings. And how do you characterize it? Well, the best way to think about futures thinking in terms of 5 Ps: what's probable, what's possible, what's preferable, what's going on in the present, i.e. trends, and then the panoramic, which can also be integrating or systems view or thinking of context. And I think the future is largely set out in the early 70s, mostly talking about what is probable, and there's all sorts of evolutionary schemes, stage theories of how we are going to evolve, and so forth, and you don't have any of that now. And there's been a shift over to thinking about preferred futures, and that was reflected in this meeting here, and we owe a lot to Metta to get the ball rolling on this shift. And perhaps instead of CAFS, then maybe this might evolve to an organization, the Canadian Association for Secure Sustainability, just to throw that out. Okay, second observation. Joy said, well, we got the tools, why don't we do it? And I have a single word answer to that, is infoglut. It's important to recognize, although a few people it's so obvious, but yet they overlook it, the radically changing context of information in the last few decades. And one quick way of summing that up, and maybe some of you have heard of Paul Ehrlich's formulation, again from the 1970s, the IPAT formula, that the impact on the environment is population times affluence times technology. So as a wise guy, I changed that just a little bit for information to what I call the IPOP formula, which is more population, more people, and more organizations that are sponsoring organizations times technology, which enables all sorts of words and messages instantly sent. And not only that, we have the social media, and not only that, we have cable television and pile of offerings, so that there's a huge world of messages and lots of competition. The way to overcome that was formulated by my mentor, Bertrand Gross, in 1962. He called it Operation Basic. And it's very simple when you think about it. You need not only bibliography, but you need abstracts, you need surveys, you need indexes, and then I changed the C from the original, and that you need critiques, so that you can somehow you point to the most important items in this collection of information. But there's no information system right now that would cover the areas that we're concerned with here, although there are a lot of information portals. I'll get into that in a moment. But But I should emphasize that right now there's a huge amount of wasted information. You know, we're concerned about wasted food and wasted resources, but it's also wasted information. I mean, someone struggles to publish a book and it has a half-life of a couple years and then it's forgotten. And articles are parked in journals which nobody ever reads, and I'm going to subsequently talk about reports that are put out by organizations. Wonderful reports are all online, free for the download, but you have to know that they're there. So Operation Basic would be needed if you want to stay on top of what people are writing in one form or another. Okay, third observation. Joy also said, well, we are here to explore the how of integrating across the board, what to support and what to restrain. And I can add that what to expand and what to contract. And, you know, we're given the categories here today, and I'm not going to contest them. We'll go with what we have. But to take one example that I'm very keen on right now about a category that perhaps deserves expansion, that has to do with radiation. You know, you assume that radiation is coming from nuclear power plants or possible a weapon that gets detonated. But I just recently became aware of radiation from cell phones.
You're talking ionizing and you're talking about electromagnetic radiation.
Yeah, but it's still radiation that may cause cancer, okay? And there's a special report in the Nation on April 23rd. I brought it here for anyone who's concerned, saying that summarizes very good investigative reporting, summarizing the literature. And it says that not only is there ample evidence right now that there's radiation from cell phones, which are used by billions of people worldwide, but now they're installing 5G technology so that we can have the Internet of Things, which will, quote unquote, massively increase radiation exposure. So you might, that's one consideration for expanding a category and all that. Anyway, in terms of integration, there's simply no rules, no experts. Like thinking about the future, there's no experts, but you do have competition. Most notably, you have the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, which is quite a mouthful, but nevertheless, I would think that that would be the kind of basis from which you can compare what you have to offer and generally support. There's also 18 different areas for remedies proposed recently by the Club of Rome. I recently reviewed their book, and that too is a huge mouthful. The Millennium Project in Washington has 15 global challenges that they've been pushing for the last 20 years. The Global Challenges Foundation in Stockholm has 10 challenges, including a couple of physical ones, like being hit by an asteroid, which would certainly end everything if it's a big one. The World Economic Forum in Davos has their annual list of risks, and then of course here we want to come up with proposals in 6 areas. So it's a question of how big a package you have. 6 is more manageable, but there's a lot more that's out there, which is something to keep in mind. What particularly is missing? The biggest hole in this program is economics. We don't have an economist here. Now, I'm not an economist, but I'm a non-disciplinary social scientist, so I have some appreciation for economics, at least some of the basics, understanding. There's very simple things like costs and benefits. And you can quantify that to some degree, and I think that's very important to introduce it into the arguments that you make, in addition to the ethical arguments. I mean, that's fine, but ethical arguments can only go so far, and then the eyes glaze over, and Joy's nodding her head. And, you know, to take climate change, there are huge costs already, as pointed out most notably by Lord Nicholas Stern in the UK in the Stern Report. And he has a recent book from MIT Press called Why Are We Waiting?, which goes into great detail about this. And he warns that the costs will increase, which is kind of like obvious, like pandemics will happen. We're going to have more costs. In the US, just last year, although it may have been a bad year, it's calculated $310 billion for all the hurricanes, floods, and forest fires. For nuclear, of course, what are the costs? for maintaining weapons and plants, for upgrading both the weapons and the plants, and also for getting rid of them. Well, largely, we don't know. I mean, the only figure that people know of is that the U.S. has announced that it costs $1.2 trillion over the next 10 years to upgrade their nuclear arsenal to make it safe and create some smaller, more tactical nukes, which might encourage them to use them. But what are the other costs worldwide, but especially the U.S.? And if nobody knows, then we ought to point that out and say, you know, where are the calculations for that? For cyber costs, they're huge already, in the trillions of dollars in the next few years. And I think this is for business alone that it's an inconvenience, but then there's also for governments and also for individuals. The disruption that we're having from hacking, and despite the growth of cybersecurity firms that David was referring to, the hackers seem to be a few steps ahead all the time, and there's always a threat of the entire system coming down for some extended period of time. It won't perhaps kill people, but it'll certainly be massive inconvenience and economic costs. So, number 5 observation is the role of business, which was raised by both Joy and Paul Antze. About a year ago, I published a paper in the Journal of the World Academy of Art and Science at Cadmus, volume 3, number 2, and it's online. Look for cadmusjournal.org. And the title of the paper is Greening Capitalism Quietly, 7 driving forces for the necessary revolution, which is a term from MIT's, what's his name? I have a blank at the moment. But anyway, it's a necessary revolution. Okay, 7, well, I identified 150 organizations in 7 categories, each having a role in driving this greening of business, or at least some or many businesses. You don't know how many. The first are business-led organizations, such as the World Business Council for Sustainability. I think that's the title. So someone,
That's right.
I have it right? Okay, good. The second is ethics-led groups, church groups that are pushing businesses to be good, as well as the UN Global Compact. The third group is accounting groups. There's about 20 of those, and this might sound rather dull, but really this is an important revolution from below, where expanding definitions, well, you're probably familiar with Mathis Wagernagel and the global footprint calculation, but just different ways to expand the consideration of the impacts of business as well as the costs, and also to consider the value of nature, which has heretofore been overlooked by conventional economics. The fourth group is certifying organizations. There's about 20 of them already. Okay, I'll try and finish real quickly. Then investing groups, consultants, and publications. Okay, 6th observation is Peter Langell about sustainable common security, and that's exactly what I'm concerned with. We have a security and sustainability guide. We have a 2-page overview that's out on the table there, and we're going to have a website in several weeks, I hope, in which we've identified more than 2,000 organizations of all sorts, including information portals. I have 133 information portals, and so you can have access to information, Dukes and Climate. We have reports, groups of women, scientists, youth, and so forth. Okay, finally, a few final words about the product, if I may. Okay, I'll try and do it in a minute. We're going to come up with 25 proposals, 1-liners. So looking ahead beyond that, I just consider that provisional, that this is a start, and I hope it will continue somehow to that we can improve on this. And my proposal is that each proposal should be backed up by one page, and one page only, not 100 pages of footnotes. But one page in which you have a description in 100, 200 words of what the problem is. Then you have a counter proposal, arguments against, then you have a rebuttal, and then you have a bibliography of just 4 or 5 items. And so you have to have the bibliography for each to support each proposal. So in sum, I hope that you'll continue to dig broader and to dig deeper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. Now I'm going to ask Joy Kennedy to bring us back to the focus on enabling measures.
Thanks, Michael. I think you've given us a go forward too, and maybe that becomes a subtext as we later this afternoon, after we've kind of voted, to think about direction. Where does this go? Do we have ideas about how to carry forward? Somebody's got to write those pages of that you're suggesting. Anyway, yesterday I identified that we had been looking across, sort of cross-sectoral look at what relates to everything. And for some reason I'm trying to use my phone here. Speaking of cell phones, I really hate them, but you know, I hope I don't get cancer from this thing. And the 5 areas that we identified were finance or economics, as you quite properly raised, civil society engagement, government engagement at all levels, business engagement with these issues, and the overall security framework. And so I'd like to, I don't know how we're going to do this. We sent in, and you don't have them on your paper yet, but you will have it, I think, when somebody's bringing, when David's bringing, thank you, the list. But, and again, these can be, you know, reshaped a bit or modified, but around finance, there, as Michael pointed out, there's a whole range of stuff going on right now. But what's the point? It's really to shift the economy, shift the trillions. Some of us are working at a process around international financial architecture, for one thing, and changing the international financial architecture, which means, you know, kind of help the rules of the game. Some of us are working at things like taxation, a whole range of taxation options that include things like carbon taxes and financial transaction taxes and all that stuff. And so I don't want to get into all the details of that, but we were trying to think of how to kind of bring a lens, I guess, if you like. We're looking at these as kind of a lens. And so with finance, we basically said to identify and encourage all financial initiatives that support a green, just transition, the SDGs, and peace. So that we've got things to hook it to, but then, you know, let's get on with the range of it. But we need to have the information about that, identifying them and encouraging. Now, yesterday, Toby gave us a short form, which was quite interesting, and we thought we'd better name that today also, because he named it yesterday, and it was, it came in the format of everybody. So I don't know if we can say that, but investors, we could say, because even by virtue of having pensions, we are investors. We don't think of ourselves as investors often, but we are. You know, if we're citizens, we're investors also. So he said, all investors stop investing in companies that ruin sustainability, peace, and security. To put it in the negative and flip it. So that's a possibility. We had lots of comment to go along with it too, so I won't get into the comments, but everything from Bretton Woods to the list that Michael just talked about, to the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which Mark Carney is chairing, that is really starting to move the dial on the needle. So that area of finance, we think, is a critical one. Shift the trillions, if you like, is what we say in the climate divestment and reinvestment movement, shift the drones. Okay, the second area that we thought to bring forward is around civil society. So we said civil society engages for transformative justice, gaining direct participation in global processes and organization. A lot of what Peter Haynell and Fergus Watt were talking about yesterday in their presentations to you around, you know, the value of real participation and being at the table, of being in the midst of all of that stuff. Not just in the street, although being in the street is important, but to engage at the highest levels is also incredibly important. And again, lots of comment on that. But it's kind of the thing about yesterday, talking about our responsibility as global citizens. Under governments, we were particularly concerned around municipalities and subnational governments, because we know that in the 6 areas, there's going to be lots to the federal government or to the international bodies like the UN, for example, etc. But we focused on municipalities and subnational governments giving leadership in global processes, networks, and institutions seeking global solutions. There are so many places where that's happening now, increasingly, and we heard yesterday about how cities are becoming really big players in the shifts forward. I know for sure in the climate change world, and you know, in the States, the We're Still In campaign is very driven by municipalities and subnational government states, pension funds, etc. Business, you know, can anybody tell business what to do? I guess so. Yeah. Good. Okay. I mean, that was Toby's point yesterday, wasn't it? Really? Yeah. A lot. Yeah. And we, so to format it, we said businesses, all businesses that is, must adhere to human rights and ecologically based regimes, practicing corporate social responsibility, ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance, disclosing climate risk. Disclosing climate risk is critical because that changes the equation for what they have to disclose. And it's having ripple effects right through the private sector. But increasingly that's becoming a demand, and not just climate risk. I mean, it can be all risk, right? So all of the risks that we have been talking about can be included in that. And the last one we wanted to bring forward, because we know we had 5, was around security. The framework that we've been hearing about, that citizens and governments embrace the umbrella concept of sustainable common security and use it as a framework within which you know, we can list a whole lot of things. But we thought that frameworks are really what we're after here. In a way, and so that's what we had. Now there are other things on the list that you'll see when it comes round, but that was our approach, and we thought we would offer it up and see what you think.
Is there any way for us to get the list up on the screen?
Now I think you have it from an email from me. I think I saw something popped up there. Was it?
Sorry, this is the full list.
This is no, just the
you had one that said
just the 5 that Joy's been talking about now.
It was I saw it on your list. It had JK email or something like that.
It went out as an email, but it has not been added to the enabling measures, and I don't think we want to just be limited to the ones you.
No. You already have a list.
I think you know most of these others are more specific. And therefore something that we can actually hold them accountable for. So,
but just in terms of being able to have a discussion now following Joy's presentation, it would be very useful for the audience to see that up on the screen.
Well, where are they?
They're on. Oh, I saw them on your list when you were setting up. There's one that says JK email in there, and I think.
On the website, right?
They came as an email.
Okay, well, I will switch over to,
I think we want to formulate these as very specific demands on public institutions. You know, WTO, you do this. UN General Assembly, we want you to do this. This is a demand for you to do these things.
The only problem is there are 25 of those.
Pretty specific kinds of commands that we're issuing
Well, we
as civil society, you know. Not, we hope everybody will be more responsible, but we want you to do this thing because that's a responsible thing to do.
Right, yeah, just there.
And so
Hold on.
Can I speak against that?
Ken, you had it. Okay. It's coming up. It's further down. Okay.
Yeah,
Just scroll down. Whoops. There. So we're just
There it is, from Joy Kennedy.
from Joy Kennedy down.
Joy Kennedy.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Down, that's
Okay,
it.
we'll just open that then, yeah.
Magic.
Okay, it's opening Word.
okay, Joy, can I
Yeah, yeah,
offer
Michael, yeah.
a counter view? I would disagree with Metta on that because, in many instances, I think there are many institutions, and just to mention one or two, unless it's very prominent, like the IPCC, then you're just narrowing your focus. And secondly, it just takes up space. I mean, it's hard enough to have a proposal in 15 words, and then is that also going to include institutions that ought to act? And that's why I think you need a one-page follow-up for every proposal in which you could list the enabling institutions, both public and private, that might consider this proposal.
So what we did in formulating those broader category kind of measures was then in the lists of and for the comments, we had a long a string, you could say, of all those kinds of organizations, like naming outright WTO, IMF, World Bank, and a whole range, because they all need to act. I mean, it's almost a simultaneous kind of necessary
and say
requirement.
all global financial institutions.
Yeah.
Which would encompass these.
Yeah.
You say that, but not something just really vague, like you ought to be more responsible.
No, I don't think
What
we were just saying be
particular
more
things do
responsible.
we want to have enacted?
Let's stick with what's actually here on the screen right now, because we can see what's there and what isn't there.
Okay, there it's up.
Yeah.
So Paul, do you want to?
Well, I wanted to speak to one of those points.
Okay.
And in a way, it responds partly, I'm sorry, yes. Metta, this responds partly to what you're saying and also to the amendment that you wanted to introduce, Joy, that Toby brought in with with respect to the first proposal. And the amendment was something that does, in a way, lend itself to your critique about it, because it was all investors refrain from or divest from companies engaged in wrecking the planet or the environment, something like that. Toby actually, although Toby did say that in his presentation, Toby said something else, which actually was a lot more concrete, which was that there are major institutional investors. There are pensions, there are insurance investors, there are municipal and other bodies that invest over the long term. And there are regulatory bodies for those types of investors. Those regulatory bodies would be the right destination for this particular request, and it is that they set standards which exclude investment in companies shown to have a destructive effect on the planetary environment and more broadly on the stability of human society, something like that.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
That kind of formulation works.
Okay.
This other doesn't.
Great. Let it be so. That's it. Unless Phil, you have a suggestion how to change that?
No, I mean,
fine, if the feeling of the meeting is to do that, we can do it. But I think the point was that, Metta, you suggested every one of these items should be directed to the WTO or the UN General Assembly or whoever. The point we're trying to make is that if you look back at the list, can we bring the list back?
Okay, sorry.
Oh, do we look at all the headings?
Two things at once. Middle line.
Let's see. Can we see all the
Okay.
headings?
I
Just
have to scroll down if
I'll
that's
stay that
okay.
way.
Just stay with the first one for a minute.
Okay.
Look at the number of institutions which are involved and the number of arenas and settings which are involved in making change. You know, you're not going to do it by going to the WTO. You need to go to a number of different ones. You need to work in a number of these different areas.
But
Now,
he just gave the answer. He said the regulatory bodies should be more specific about setting standards. That's the kind of formulation that
That's
you can
one-
hold people accountable.
That's just one though.
That's just one
That was
part
just,
of it.
that was meant to be as a substitute for this suggestion that came from Toby to all investors. So this is.
You've got 5 points,
Yeah,
and you're
right.
trying to cover the waterfront. You
Yeah,
can do
you're
5
right.
small things.
That's all.
Well, what do you expect if you're going to cover everything in 5?
Shut up.
Sorry, I mean, it's a fair debate. I'm not trying to shut you up, but I think that if you have something very, very specific and focused, it's one small part of it. You do need to work on all of these simultaneously. Any one group can focus on any one of these areas to move it forward.
We have a comment from Robin.
And maybe this will bring the two sides together a bit. So, I mean, what's distinct about enabling measures is that they're not as specific as the other categories for policy proposals. So measures and policy proposals are not exactly the same thing. Measures are all-encompassing, in which there may be policy proposals, but directed more broadly. So I think the framework that's been set here is appropriate, because within each of the measures, there are policies directed at a number of institutions.
Thank you very much. That's a very helpful clarification.
Well, and just to say, related to that, we see that the proposals coming from the other 6 areas will be reflective of that they would hook in, if you like. If you wanted to look at it like a crochet mat, you know, how you hook them in to each. That kind of gives a foundational sort of substratum that the other 6 should be able to be reflected in.
So, Paul, do you want to say anything else?
No, well, just a minor comment. Unfortunately, I don't have the actual names, nor did Toby give us the actual names of the regulatory bodies.
There are many, many, many.
But there are many, 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 yes. So we probably can't put them all here. We need to just refer to them as, it's like we have all these specific ones and regulatory bodies for major institutional investors, something of that sort, to simply include them as part of the list that we're setting up.
Yeah. Since we don't have, sorry, yes, sir.
I think it might be helpful, there was a reference to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Although they're not a regulatory body in the formal sense, they do encourage minimal environmental standards among their members, you know, bring up the
Yeah. No, thank you. That's a good point. I mean, it is an influential body. It may not directly make policy, but it certainly influences it.
We had OECD in there.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, good, I'm glad.
There's a second one.
Can we just go further down the list in case there are any particular comments on the other points?
So under governments, it is, as Joyce said, it's subnational governments?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should it
This is
say
partly
that?
because-
I know it says it in the subheading.
This is partly because, I mean, there is a fair bit of action. The other points that we make, federal government, national government is very much a part of that. It's not to exclude it.
Okay.
This is simply an area where things are moving forward. The most obvious area is climate change, but in many other areas too, things may be blocked at central government level, but they're moving it elsewhere. And these bodies then influence central government.
This, by the way, this speaks very much to the strategy recommended by Doug Saunders last night, which is where you were blocked at the national level, there may be still many other excellent opportunities in almost in any part of the world, including those with very restrictive national governments, and there are ways to move there. This is one example, which is all of the very interesting and active urban federations that are now dealing with issues of this kind.
Yeah. The fourth item on businesses, this
comment?
Let's include global governance in under number 3, because they're looking at global challenges, and without global solutions, we've known since the 95 UN report on global governance that
I think it's a different point.
Yeah, I think it would have to be a different point, and it competes with the 5.
First Watt mentioned that
Yeah.
in the largest context of UN reform.
Yes.
That is the objective. And,
well, it's really more at the level of the object. This is the issue between, the objective and the means. The objective is to come to global governance. But where this belongs, I'm not sure it's an enabling measure. It's something that the enabling measures should bring about. But
it certainly could be in the context or the comment. Absolutely.
Sorry. Yes, sir, at the back first.
Just another idea. Should we not be thinking about motivation? There are a vast number of great ideas here, but what will enable these ideas to be acted upon in a way better than we've been doing so far? And I would say there's a motivation deficit. And indeed, we need another way to talk and think about all of these matters. One of them, I would say, includes emotion as well as reason. But we're not really talking much about how we feel and how the power of feeling can be brought to bear to support and enact many of these great ideas. I think there's a deeper dimension that should be addressed in this program. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a very interesting observation. I'm not sure that I feel qualified to respond to that, but it's a very fair point. Quite where we put it on these sort of one-dimensional maps, I'm not entirely sure. One thing that we did discuss a great deal was in thinking about what's happening now and what might happen, is that far more attention needs to be given to building alliances at a fairly early stage, and there is a tendency in some areas in civil society to think that we organize and we'll move forward and we'll do what we can, and then we get thwarted. And sometimes if you look for alliances fairly early on in the process, then things will move forward much, much better. You're not going to do it alone. I think that's the critical point that many have understood very well, and we tried to capture some of that here. On the last point, on number 4, if there was some concern that this be directed to particular organizations rather than businesses, it could be to national bodies like confederations of business and industry, those bodies of that kind, as a way to getting at businesses. It's the same point, but it might make it more focused.
Can you explain those 2 acronyms?
Joy?
Oh,
CSR.
CSR. Okay, CSR is corporate social responsibility. It's kind of a rubric now. I'd say it's corporate ecological responsibility, but I mean, there are courses in it now that you get certified in. My gosh. I remember when we first raised it. ESG is the accounting term for what businesses are. It's now used as one of a major criteria when accountants do audits. It's environmental, social, and governance areas. It kind of goes with the triple bottom line idea, but it kind of is a bit beyond that. Yeah, Peter.
Just, if I can make 2 very quick comments. One is a specific one under businesses. The International Chamber of Commerce is certainly one umbrella body. There are others. I mean, there's the Davos process, but that's really part of those big ones. The other thing has to do with context, which I mentioned earlier, and this is not an original thought. About a week ago, I attended a talk by a man named Faulkner from the London School of Economics, and specifically about the evolution of environmentalism. So this addresses the climate issue, but perhaps some aspects are applicable to the other issues. And after a long process, the international society has accepted an environmental normative order. And this is now supported by international law, by diplomacy. There is some synergy with human rights there, for instance. So the idea of the green state, green economy, and so forth is quite accepted, well, except for some outliers like Trump's US or conflict areas like Syria. So somehow this aspect of the context is something that I think should enter the consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we should have a mention of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. That's a good example of what Saunders talking about, influencing some repressive regime somewhere, because at least there's a member of a government agency that deals with conservation in there.
I worked with them in Pakistan years ago. Sorry.
Yeah, I seem to be a little lost. Are you proposing these are the 5 areas in which you will formulate some enabling measures?
No,
These are not enabling measures. You're just making statements about different sectors and groups.
No, they are enabling measures in a very broad sense, because we have to capture everything in 5 points. I mean, you could make very specific sub-points for each one of these.
Each of these could be broken down to 25 recommendations apiece.
No, but, so the word will is not written in, but it should be like businesses will adhere to, or.
Okay, item 2. Yeah, none of them actually say to do anything.
We were waiting for the feeling of, is it a will do it, is shall do it, must do it, you know, like what's the direction of this conference in terms of yeah, anyway.
Okay, just another comment. So like in the original list here for global warming, there were 2 items that I was actually hoping would get transferred over to enabling measures.
We were hoping that you would pick up some we also.
Actually, you see, item 3 on global warming, all states shall ensure female access to education. Item 11 has talking about stabilizing human population. But then that's actually redundant with, I think, item 17 under enabling measures, which is promote gender equality and make girls' education and reproductive health and social norm. So as long as item 17 on this list makes it into your list of 5, then I think we can delete what we have in the global warming list.
So this was the high stakes poker game we were anticipating. that in fact there were many things that we saw on the previous lists that were sort of starting to show up on the enabling measures list, and we thought, no, push them back.
We're counting on you.
Yeah, we're counting on you because you get 6 and we get 5. Anyway, that was kind of the reason we went to this format, because we could see in that list, and in the full list of all the others, that there were many, many that could be enabling measures. They could be very specific enabling measures. But we were restricted to 5, unless we made all 25 enabling measures, you know. But and exactly what you're talking about is what we were faced with, the push and pull of where things belong. So we said, no, let's push back to keep those things where they are in the, you know, the lists of like global warming, etc. Anyway, that was our rationale, knowing that 5 was going to be pretty restrictive.
I'm sorry, you've been very patient.
I don't like any of these. I think they're not, there's their attitudes, they're controversial, you could say. We're being green, yeah, okay, I'm sorry, they're not operationally measurable, you can't hold anybody accountable to those. I nominate, if there's a word for that, I don't know what the word is. I propose the following list from the printout that you have. Number 1, 2, 4, can you read it? 6, 7, and 15.
That's 6.
Those are the ones that I think would actually, you know whether or not you got a parliamentary assembly or not. You know whether you have a UN emergency peace service or not. You know whether countries have donated 60% of their savings, etc. These are operationally determined, measurable, quantifiable things that are real policies. These are not policies, these are issues. What are
they all include
1,
policies.
2, 4, 6, and 7, and 15.
That's 6, not 5.
5.
Sorry,
Okay,
yes,
fine.
we
Now
have
take off number 15, or I don't know, it doesn't matter. Take off number 6. Take off number 6 and leave number 15. Those would work.
Well, we have a fundamental disagreement, I think. Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
At the end of the day, we're not going to come up with some perfect document. So I suggest, let's take the best we've come up with so far and move on. The other thing is, the most I expect from this meeting, where probably all like-minded people, would be, I might change my mind about something, and somebody else might hear. But we should think of the audience, really, after perhaps changing our minds in here. The impact we're going to have outside is going to be very, very limited. This is not to say we shouldn't give it a good whack, but we're not going to come up with a perfect document. We might influence one another. We should think of the audience. The world isn't going to instantly change because we come up with a list service. So, I suggest move on.
We're down to number 5. Can we see number 5?
Let me bring it up, please. Yeah, this was actually proposed to us, and we have accepted it as part of our nomination because it covers a very broad range of issues within it. It's not just about security in the sense of defense, but also in terms of much broader human security.
And not just human security. The global common security. So that does include other species, we would suggest.
Yeah. Right. Now, all of these, it's fair, are broad and general, and that was the whole purpose, to try to encompass as much as we could within these 5 topics. For any one of them, you can have a very, very specific sub point, which will address one very practical question, but it only addresses a very small part of the matter. So that's the approach that we've taken. Yes, sir.
The definition and objectives are significantly different than were outlined. What we were talking about under sustainable common security was really a means to build a movement of movements around key issues. And secondly, to challenge the national security narrative of constantly preparing for more war. This looks like a bit of a compromise between different proposed options.
That's fair enough, it is. Yes.
All consistent with explaining sustainable common security.
Well, you've got 15 words. You're welcome to have a go at
if citizens,
trying to reshape it.
Citizens are included here. Citizens embrace the umbrella concept of sustainable common security. That would imply that there'd be some sort of a movement among citizens to embrace that, perhaps a movement of movements, if you like. But one can't, there's not enough room to say all that. It's a way of capturing some element of that in the proposal.
Yeah. Sorry,
We did do it
just a
in
minute.
20 words, and it seemed to convey actually the meaning behind sustainable common security, and that it be shared security, that it be long-term, that addresses the consequences of insecurity, and that it covers the broader spectrum of issues we've discussed with an umbrella that unites and builds support and solidarity between civil society causes and movements.
Well,
what I see doesn't seem to be consistent.
Well, we're very happy to get another 15 words. So.
He's not objecting to the bold, he's objecting to the section beneath, which can be amended, correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, sure.
Oh, yeah,
That
yeah.
could be, what you just
Oh,
said
yeah.
could be included in the section below.
But we couldn't do 20 words, it had to be 15.
Bold is the only thing. Okay, the bold's fine, okay.
Okay, thank you. Michael.
Yeah, much of that language there is fine, which I sent to you. I like the proposal in the bold and the longer paragraph, but the comment entail a refocusing of the UN that's too narrow. And it requires a refocusing in many groups, both the UN and NGOs and governments and citizens, where you think more about security, broaden the concept to include sustainability, or you could use a UN proposal for human security, which I didn't put in there, but ought to be thrown in. And then for sustainability, also to deal with security matters, because as I said, this is our battle cry here. You can't have sustainability without security, in many areas you don't have it at all in peacetime.
Right. Okay.
So
accepted. Yeah.
So take out just that line of the comment.
Okay.
Or revamp that.
Or revamp it to
remove or expand.
But everybody has to think about the relationship of the two.
Yes, Metta.
I can put this whole thing in 3 words.
Good.
It's a Google motto: don't be evil. Now, if you really want to just put everything together, real simple: don't be evil. If you want policies, you have to say, what do you mean by that? What does it look like in specific terms? And you can't have everything. You've got to pick 6. Five. So you have to be specific. What 5 things do you want to have happen? And you can't tell from that.
Well, if I can just say a word about that, Matt, it seems to me that the enabling measures are in a somewhat different category from all of the other measures. And we see these as, in some ways, even the restriction to the word measures is a bit of a limitation, because we're looking at what are their fundamental preconditions, situations that make it very difficult to do these other things, which are many of them easily stated in more specific ways and have been for a long time, and strangely nothing has happened. Why is that? It's because of resistance in a number of these areas. So what we're doing is defining these larger changes that have to happen, and we are identifying bodies, in most of these cases, bodies associated with those changes where we would expect a different approach to be taken up, which we define in the bold print briefly. So this refers to a larger process. It can't be reduced to a simple kind of measure executed by one group and aimed at a particular problem. It's different from the others.
If the audience agrees with you that this kind of vague thing is what they want, then you take a vote and decide. I will shut up. I just don't think this is useful.
I would just emphasize that this is a characteristic specifically of the enabling measures. I would agree with you totally, Metta, about all the other measures, which should be directly targeted. These are somewhat targeted, but they're targeted to a broader body of institutions, groups, regulatory agencies, and so on, because they're by their nature large and diffuse problems rather than more narrow and specific ones.
It's time to take a vote.
I want to make one more comment based on something somebody raised about linking things into existing opportunities, maybe we'd call it that way. I think it was you, wasn't it? Because in each of these, that stuff's already underway. It needs bumping up. It needs to be known. It needs to be out there so people know how to connect in with it and bump it up further. These are not, sort of dreams out there. These are things that are on the ground, happening, developing, but need to have a more harmonized, more concerted effort and more linked in with other areas. Some of it's happening in silos, and some of it could easily be linked if you had a framework whereby people would make the connection. Yeah, you know, kind of this, like, so the last one, for example, you can see a whole number of things going on right now at different levels, internationally, nationally, locally even, that could fit in under that kind of a category. So, I mean, it's not pie in the sky when you die by and by. This is looking at stuff that is doable immediately, and in the short and long term. Yeah.
I think it's very difficult to make the enabling measures before you know what your points are that you want to enable. So it might be more valuable to find out what the points are in each group, and then discuss what the enabling measures are that would allow those points to exist or to develop.
Yeah.
I agree.
We don't have a process time for that, but I mean, people would have to look at how that last part. Coffee break. Danny.
Metta just proposed that we vote now.
Well, I just saw hands up first, though. We still have a bit of time, yeah.
Again, can you not reframe these 5 points into a directive that Metta wants?
Could try. I mean, we'd have to take a coffee break. That's what Danny's saying. You know, I mean, you know, I think it's fair enough to say we would bring them back in the afternoon. Yeah. Fair.
Yeah.
Everybody, I'm seeing heads nodding all over. Yeah. Robert.
Yeah, but I think it would be good to get an idea of whether this plenary here right now is sympathetic to the 5 themes as outlined, even if they need to be tweaked into more with more verbs behind them. Okay. You know, just to get an idea whether we are like absolutely at odds with each other, you know, or whether we're generally along these lines.
So can we not take a vote, but can we see about consensus, a kind of a sense of, we may not be on consensus, but whether that that kind of outline. Well, I'd say
a sense of the meeting.
A sense of the meeting, yeah.
Sense of the meeting. It doesn't mean to raise a hand.
Without being official.
Okay, is it fair to use that?
See if you have a serious conflict or not.
Okay. Do you have a serious conflict with those areas? Raise your hand.
Wow. Of course, that's the point. Everybody in the world would agree with this, but it doesn't mean anything.
Hang on.
Just wait.
A show of hands for whether we could move forward with those 5 areas then and try to sharpen adverbs and bring that back this afternoon. Show of hands for that. Okay, so I think that's our direction, yeah? Are there any other questions I should have asked?
Oh, okay.
So I'm just wondering, I don't have that anywhere.
No, you don't. It will come. It's on a list. The printouts are.
And can we get these online? And I'd like to send them out to my list.
No.
After the program is finished?
Oh, after it's finished? Yeah. Oh, yeah, after, fine. Well, no, the platform will go out online. But no, you will have them on paper, I believe, by noon, where I think that was the agreement, right? But anyway, okay, so does that satisfy the need right now? At least we have a sense of, you know, how to carve out the territory and see, and I have Metta's list that she identified to see whether those actually, the 1, 2, 4, 7, 15, whether there's a way that they could hook together or not. I mean, we'll work with that.